I'm thinking specifically of folks coming out of the pandemic and meeting a world that will be different than before the pandemic. And I think what Laura's saying about many skills is so true and so excellently and so well put. But it's a question. Nothing is going to be consistent and let's say sacred anymore. There's two ways to look at that. One, we can be very frightened of it and thinking, oh, everything's going to be different. The other way is we can say, oh, everything's going to be different. And we can just take the attitude that difference means opportunity. And those who actually are strongly motivated, I've certainly found over my time in music is that those who are strongly motivated toward music and toward what they do tend to stay in the business and find a way, some kind of a way to do it. But it does take patience. And there's a saying that you can do everything, but not all at the same time. So you want to sort of sort things out and prepare for each one. I'm sure, like a lot of us, during this pandemic, we've had to ask ourselves a lot of questions about how much do I love music? Why am I wanting to be a musician? What do I like to perform? Do I like getting applause and to get my self-definition by getting applause? Or do I like the clarinet so much? I just want to play that. Do I love music? Do I love playing with people? All these different things are potential motivators for us. And I think if we can get a handle on that, and as we enter this new world that's coming quite quickly now, then I think those who really must do music and who, shall we say, are musicians, not people who do music for a job, but people who are musicians, we'll find a way. And I'd like to, I kind of like to think about it, oh boy, the world's going to be different when this is all over.
I think for students, being able to develop a wide variety of skill sets where they can use their musical abilities, but then they're also incorporating some other skill sets that are more business minded, or maybe they have great writing skills, computer skills, any of those skills that can kind of combine with your musical content to generate some kind of product that people want to invest in, whether it's teaching, whether it's producing music, whether it's arranging music or recording music. Being able to be flexible and creative during this time, I think, is one of the biggest things. And gentlemen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think really being able to think outside of the box with the technology that we have right now. I'm looking around and seeing some musicians do some pretty amazing things during the pandemic that I've just sat back and gone, wow. And so I would say to students, you really just have to have a diverse background. If you want to be viable, if you want to make a living, if you want to, put food on the table and a roof over your head, you have to be able to really look at all of your skills.
I really only wanted to play in an orchestra, and I got that job when I was 23. And I was really grateful for it. I had a good time, but it didn't pay much. And all the time that I was there, and my wife got a job playing cello in the orchestra as well, and still it was not very much. We always had to struggle to make ends meet. And I was there 15 years, and then this job at LSU came up. And the dean at that time took a chance on me. And I knew some of the other people that taught there. And I think as I've gone through my whole life, I've found that, yes, you have to be passionate. Yes, you have to be patient and persistent. My brother's an actor. One of my brothers is an actor. And those are the exact words that he uses, patience and persistence. But, there's a French phrase where they say, plus ça change, plus la même chose. Yes, things look different. yes, we have to be varied in our approach. But at least for me, I feel like I've had to be varied in my approach my whole career and look for how can I satisfy the things that I wanted to do. I think the real thing is the patience and the persistence. You got to love it. You got to really want it. If you're lucky enough to get a job doing it, you want to run with it. But in the end, if you're going to play the clarinet at least, you got to learn how to play the instrument. And getting, and here at Northwestern, we have so many students who are involved with other degrees, who have other interests, and we encourage that here. It's sort of our thing here. And they take 5 years, they get 2 degrees, and that's great. And I think that contributes to them thinking about how they're going to look at their lives and their careers. And sometimes we encourage that, sometimes we don't. I try to encourage them to make those decisions as early as possible, but it's not always easy. I mean, when you think back when you were 18, what did you know what you really wanted to do? I wanted to go to Juilliard. I grew up in New York, and my parents said, that's not a good idea. I think you should go to, I went to Oberlin. And it was the same reason that I'm teaching now in Northwestern. They have as many options as possible. I think the danger that we have to be careful about is that when we say that things are changing and we want to adapt to this or that certain scenario, we don't use that as an excuse to sort of dibble and dabble at things, that we still have to learn the craft. We still have to be passionate about what we do. And the ones who are the most passionate and work the hardest, those are the ones that will be successful.
I'd like briefly to put on another hat if I can, because I've been artistic director of a festival up in Canada for, well, let's see, 36 years now, so longer than I've been at IU. And so it's a question of, we're talking about dealing with colleagues and within the music world, but I've had to go outside the music world. Of course, you have to walk into a boardroom and try to get money out of them. And you have to, if a patron comes along, you have to sit and listen to their story about how they played piano, but then they stopped, and that's something you've heard many, many times. Also, so there's that whole aspect of reaching out to people outside the profession, outside the business, which is basically comes down to people skills that we hopefully were taught when we were kids. And it comes down to those P words, those important P words. But also I'm in a position where I actually hire musicians, probably 100 or 150 musicians a summer to come and play. That we don't teach. It's not a teaching festival. It's just a performance festival, which of course the last 2 years is shut our doors, more or less. But so when I'm thinking of hiring somebody, particularly a young player, it's assumed that they can play the part. They wouldn't get to first base. If it's assumed they can play their instrument, they can play the part, and that they are a well-versed, interesting musician. Then these days, the level is tremendous. There may be 10 people available that say I could choose from. So who am I going to pick? I have to think of my audience now, because my audience are the ones who keep us going. They come and buy the tickets, they give the donations. They have to like the music. It has to be good music, otherwise that's the thing. This is all stuff that's after. So I'm going to look to the person who will communicate with those folks the best way. Now that doesn't mean they go on stage and they'll tell jokes and make stories, but just the natural person. Will they hang around after the concert and talk to people who come backstage? It's amazing how important that is. And will they, if they walking down the street, it's quite a small town, someone comes up, will they take the time to talk to that person and remember their name? And if they get a letter saying wonderful performance or something, will they write a response saying, thank you, it means a lot? These are very, very powerful, powerful skills. When you're a musician, you are on stage. Someone is looking at you on stage. They are in awe of you because you can do something that they can't, or maybe that they wanted to do when they were a kid and can't. And if you break their bubble, you are communicating directly with Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven and new music and composers. And you get to travel around the world and do all this kind of stuff. They love that. They want to see that. So if you come along and they come and say hi and you go, rah, 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 blah, blah, you've hurt music. So it's just, don't forget, again, back to lessons you learned in kindergarten and what your parents say, you know, shine your shoes. If you have a choice, be nice. Even if you're tired, be nice.
Yeah.
It's incredibly it's a skill we all need, because don't forget, as soon as you walk on that stage and start to play, you're doing something that very few people in the world can do. It may seem like everybody can play the clarinet, right? Because we're in the clarinet society, and but no, you are a rare person. And one, if you can communicate your passion to them, then you're even more rare. And the people need that and they love it. And so that's one of the wonderful things. If you can indulge one little story, sorry, Lauren, one little story.
Oh, no.
Because it has to do with IT too. I was on an airplane a while ago, and you know, you're on an airplane, pre-COVID, of course. What do you do? What do you do? Blah, blah. And this man, he says, I'm a computer scientist. Oh, that's good. Said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a musician. Oh, you do play dances? Do you play? I said, no, I'm a classical musician. I play mostly chamber music. And he says, oh, I like chamber music. He says, I like chamber music. He says, it's so quaint. So he must have seen my face, you know, try as I might to be friendly. Quaint. So he jumped on it and he said, wait, let me explain. He says, all day I'm looking at a screen. Things are changing fast. I push a button and this goes. He says, at the end of the day, I need to go to a concert and hear and watch people playing. And he said, 300-year-old instruments, tuning by ear, sweating, getting nervous, communicating with each other, fixing their reeds, their wooden reeds with little pieces of Dutch rush or whatever they use. He says, I need that for my humanity. And so I thought, okay, let's talk. The rest of the trip was great. But so, you know, never forget that we are in a way, we are the carriers of this humanity for many, many people. And it's easy for us to forget when we're worried about playing the right note and practicing and all these kind of things, and what do our colleagues think of us and all that. It's easy to forget that, but it's very, very important.
I was going to add another P word, perception. And the reason I say that is because what you were talking about, who you hire for your music festival that's going to talk to the audience, that's going to send them a thank you note, that's going to send them an email response. We once, our ensemble was once scolded on stage because we weren't smiling enough. And I thought, who's not smiling? Because I'm always, so me and Tia Turner, Tia Perdomo Turner, Tia would dance in her chair. And the music would come on and Tia would smile and dance in her chair. And you know, the audience loved that. They would come up to her after concerts. You just look like you're having such a good time. And so when the two of us would be sitting next to each other, we'd be kind of elbowing, you know, if it was a pop concert or something, or we're playing a pop medley, and we would be smiling. But I remember getting that talk you guys have to smile more. The perception is that you aren't having a good time. And I thought to myself, who's not having a good time on stage making music? I mean, sometimes we're backing up our chorus and we're playing whole notes and half notes, but you know, that's okay. It's still music, it's still fun. But that perception piece, I mean, I've had people come up to me after a concert that will say to me, hey, I really enjoyed the concert and you look like you were having a good time on the stage. Did that piece really make you happy? What was making you smile? And so then we could start a conversation. Or maybe Public Affairs sent me an email saying, hey, there was an audience member that really liked your solo on tour and they wanted to know, you know, what kind of mouthpiece and reed you use. Do you mind emailing them with, you know, and telling them what you did? Absolutely. I mean, that's part of our role as musical ambassadors. Now, for me, I use musical ambassadors because in the military, that for us, we're the public facing part of the Navy. We walk out there, we play in our uniforms. We are the public's viewing of the Navy. And so we are ambassadors. We are there to perform music for our citizens and for the Navy, education outreach and all of that stuff. But perception is such a really good word. And then Steve, you were talking about being on time. You know, if you're on time, you're late. And in our job, our report time is always half an hour before our downbeat, our rehearsal time. So that perception is if you're showing up 15 minutes before a rehearsal, that doesn't bode well, you know, for you, because it shows that you're not coming onto stage early enough to warm up, to be prepared, and all of those things. So I wanted to add that perception part to our conversation, because you may not know the student, you know, a young student or a professional may not know their behavior or their body language is giving off a perception to an audience member that, hey, the music's good, I'm enjoying it, but they don't look like they're having a good time. And so I think that's important to make sure we're engaging with our audience. After all, they're paying the tickets to come see the concert. They're you know, it's like your tax dollars are paying for me to have a salary. So I want to make sure that you're being entertained, that you're enjoying the music that we're making. I won my band job when I was 24, and I'm still in my band job, you know, 26 years later, and I'm at the end of that career, and I'm looking back. And I think when you're in a job that long, you can let that patience and persistence kind of fall by the wayside, or you can create more discipline within yourself and really focus more on your craft. And that's what happened to me. I had been in the band about 10 years. And back in 2007, I had kind of developed some bad habits in the band. You know, it's a large ensemble. It's a large clarinet section. It was hard to hear. I kind of felt my sound was not what I wanted it to be. And so I decided to go back to school. And I decided to go ahead and get my doctorate, and really wanted to go back to what you said, really learning your craft. I went back to the basics, clarinet 101, scales, arpeggios, long tones, rose etudes. And I studied with Eugene Mundy, and that's what we did, because I felt like I somehow playing marches and all this loud music, I had gotten away from that. And so your point of really knowing your craft and being passionate about it, you really hit the nail on the head there. And that was me even after I had a job, right? Because unlike an orchestra where you don't have to get tenure, these bands, once you're in yourself and you show up on time and you play well and you're prepared, chances are you're going to spend 20 years there if you want to. So it's really up to you how much dedication and discipline you want to put into your, you know, what you're doing with your instrument. And I just always wanted to keep, you know, the learning never stops. I think that's one of the things I tell my students. The learning never stops. And the moment you think you've learned it all, it's time to hang it up.
After my bachelor's, I went to Paris to study with Yona Ettlinger, great Israeli clarinetist who was living there. And on the way, I entered one of these international clarinet competitions, and I happened to win it. So I was 21, I was starting to get gigs, being asked to play here and there and do all that. And I came to my first lesson with him in Paris. And I wasn't in a school, I was just living in a room and taking lessons from him. And my first lesson, he said, "Oh, look, you won this, great, congratulations, 21." I thought, oh boy, I'm top of the world, here we go. And he says, "Okay, this is what I want you to do this week." And he told me 4 notes, F, E, E flat, and D. And he did an embouchure thing, point the chin, clarinet 101, right? And he said, "Okay, don't play anything else but that until the next lesson. Oh, by the way, I'm going on tour. I'll be back in 3 weeks." So there I was in Paris, didn't know anybody, living in a little room. What could I do? Walk around the city, play my 4 notes, and I cheated sometimes. I have to admit, I cheated sometimes. But when I went back to the next lesson, I realized, I didn't realize then, but now I realized what he was doing. When I went back to the second lesson, instead of being this young punk who just won a competition and thought he was, boy, I can do stuff, I went back ready to learn. I was a student again. And I think that's what he was doing. But also, as I look way back now, that set up a certain challenges about motivation. It made me think about a lot about the clarinet and the importance, just as you're both saying, the importance of the craft of the instrument. And also, when we get into the profession, maybe we can play a gazillion notes, but sometimes all we have to do is play 1 note with a nice sound in tune. And that's what the job requires. And so it taught me to practice, I suppose, the entire clarinet, not let's say technique and things like that, the entire clarinet. And more importantly, it sort of took me away from, let's say, any external things that were happening. And it happened to put me right in the center of learning the instrument, because there was nothing else to do. and it was probably the best lesson I ever had in my life. And I thanked him all my life for that lesson. And of course, as always, sometimes we don't really remember what a teacher is saying until many years later. I don't know, maybe you've all had that same thing. We go along and say, "That's what he meant." I'm so dumb. Why did it take 25 years before I realized that's what he was saying? But if you're open to it, it seems to, it's lifelong learning, just as Laura has been saying.
I mean, when I was at Oberlin, there were several different teachers. So I'm not one of these people that studied with the same person all the time. My first year, Lauren Kitt taught there. And then he left to go to the National Symphony. And then my second year, Larry McDonald came. And then my third year, I went to Berlin and studied with Carl Leister for a year. And this was the same kind of experience. I mean, I remember vividly, I have notes, I have a notebook still. I remember vividly playing the Behrman. It's an octave study at the end of the Behrman book. Really slow. Da, dee, da, dee. In my book, it was 3 pages long. And I thought my lip was bleeding for sure halfway through, but I had to get all the way through it. And so I learned a lot of discipline that way. But, I think we all learn, we're constantly learning. We have to be learning all the time. Every time I think I figure something out, something comes along that slaps me in the face and says, "What are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about." And we learn from our students, we learn from our friends, We remember what some teachers say. Some things come back to us. Fewer things nowadays that I'm so old, but you know, for me, it was also about aspiring to better things. And I was not able to get into a better orchestra. At the time that I got into New Orleans, it was a good orchestra, but I took some auditions. But you know, after a while, you have a family of your wife, she gets in the orchestra, you start having children, and before you know it, you've got a life there. And it's no longer so easy to take auditions. And by the time that I was 52, I guess I was a little bit older than you, Laura, when I decided to change my life entirely. First of all, I had been teaching at LSU for 14 years, but living in New Orleans and driving about 1,000 miles a week. And that got really tiring. And I thought sometimes that, you know, if I'd won the lottery, I'd hire a driver and I could practice in the back seat. And then I thought for another couple of seconds about that. And I said, what do you mean? I'm going to quit this job if I win the lottery. But I finally decided, and an opening came up at Cincinnati Conservatory, that I couldn't get one of those top-notch orchestra jobs, so maybe I could get a top-notch teaching job. And so I was able to get that, and then I was only there 1 year, and then I went to Northwestern. And that was a complete change, and that was in my 50s. And actually, my wife did not move at that same time. She was there in New Orleans still for 9 years, and then she retired. And we commuted back and forth. So, you know, we all take different paths. And I have students who are freelancing. I have students who are doing other jobs. I have students who have given up. And, you know, I think we try to set an example, perhaps, by what we do. And we try to be sympathetic, but nice about it, and make them understand about this patience and persistence. And you can change your life around in many different ways. And it's never too late to do that.
Well, I just want to say, Steve, what you said about transitioning 50s. I'm about to do that in 3 months. I'm going to retire in July, and I'm going to start a new position, still as a clarinetist. And I'm really thankful, really super thankful that I get the opportunity to continue doing that, kind of like, you know, you made that transition. And I also have a family. My son's graduating from high school in 2 weeks. And then in the fall, both of my kids will be at the same university. Then I'm moving across the country by myself. My husband's going to stay back here in Washington, you know, work remotely and let me go out there and see how I do. It's totally going outside of my comfort zone, but I'm looking forward to that change. But the one constant in my life is the clarinet, and I get to take it with me. And I'm fortunate enough, he's laughing. I'm fortunate enough to be able to have a second career with my clarinet. And I will say this, that during my time in the band, I've developed some IT skills. And I've already had 3 offers in IT to go work for a lot more money. But my heart and my passion is in the clarinet. And I feel like that's the transition I want to make at this moment in my life. You know, it's the biggest transition for me out of my family. They're all staying here and I'm going off into the Wild West, so to speak. But it's like you said, I mean, having that transition in your 50s, it's never too late. As you said, it's never too late to continue learning on the instrument, to that patience and persistence, and and just dedication. I feel very thankful, and it can be done, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
so I'm glad you said that. That was like really speaking to me.
It's exciting.
Our responsibilities is to, you know, guide those students, mentor those students, help them along the way. And, you know, is it all a bed of roses? I don't think it's going to be. I'm sure there's going to be, you know, good conversations and tough conversations, but in the end, I think the role as a teacher is mentoring and really guiding. And I've been doing that with my own clarinet section over the years. I've hired everybody in the clarinet section in the Navy band. I look at all of them like, I hired you, I hired you, I hired you. And the beautiful thing is to watch how they have grown in their journey, their musical journey, their musical leadership. I wasn't at the audition on Thursday because the outgoing person isn't allowed to be there. And they did a phenomenal job. They don't, I'm not going to say they don't need me, but they've been trained well enough to go through the hiring process and select who they think is musically qualified. And you know, I help them build that tradition so I can move on. And, you know, the section is set up for the next 20 years. It's a really good feeling.
Probably the most important thing that a teacher can do, apart from all the, you know, get the clarinet organized for a clarinet, is to make students aware of the importance of listening and all the levels of listening. I mean, it doesn't stop. It absolutely doesn't stop. And it can go from listening just to a piece of music, to listening to a colleague, to listening to yourself, and then to listening to what Mahler has to say to you.
Well, Cecilia, you were asking about our identity as a musician, as a clarinetist. And I think now's the time I'll tell my story. Back in March, my dad passed away from COVID. And he was on a ventilator, and I had to go down there. And it wasn't a good family dynamic. That's another story. But he, after a few days, he wasn't COVID positive anymore, even though he was in the ICU. And so his night nurse, I talked to her, and she said, you know, I know we only have one visitor a day, but if you can get here by tomorrow, such and such time, he has a couple of days left. And, you know, she said, you better come. And so I drove like 10 hours. I mean, I just drove straight to the hospital down in Texas. And they were waiting for me. And I got in there and I got to see him and was spending time with him. And she walked up to me and she said, don't you play an instrument? And I said, I do. And she said, well, did you bring it with you? And I said, oh, yes, I bring it with me wherever I go. And she said, why don't you go get your instrument and play for your dad? And I thought, oh boy, okay, I think I can do this. And I was really worried because, you know, it was a COVID ICU. And she said, you'll be fine in his room. It's there, you know, there's no virus in there, you'll be fine. So I went and I got my instruments. I had a Bluetooth speaker and I had some pre-recorded piano music with me. And so in that moment, I gave him a 45-minute recital. It's the first time I had played with any kind of accompaniment, probably in 6 or 7 months. And I sat next to his bed and I played Brahms Sonata, second movement, the Brahms F minor. I played the Mozart Concerto, first and second movement. One of the nurses requested Star Wars. So I played some Star Wars. And then I played some of the Finzi, Forlana and the Romance. And then I did the opening of the Copland Concerto. And right when I got to the end of the opening of the Copland, he passed. And the nurse tapped me on the shoulder. I put my horn down and I just walked over and held his hand, told him it was okay. And in that moment, I thought, playing my clarinet for him, my identity as a musician in that moment was probably the greatest performance of my life, because it was for him. And it really, really changed my attitude about my role as a musician. Because for those 45 minutes, I offered and comfort, not just for my dad, but for the healthcare workers. They'd never had live music on their ICU floor. And it was such a divine, I can only describe the moment as divine. It just wasn't random. But to be able to perform music for my dad after all those years of training, all the money spent on lessons in college, it was just the most incredible defining moment for my identity as a clarinet player. And I'll never have another moment like that, you know. But I would say to students or professionals or amateur enthusiasts, the music you make is a gift. Because as James said, not everybody can do it. Not everybody can give that gift of music, but we can. And that music can provide solace, comfort, joy, sadness, all of those things. And I felt all of those things as I was playing for him. And I when it was done, I thought, how did I do that? And the answer is, I was so happy to make music, right? Because I just hadn't done it in months. I was so happy to make music. I would say, I mean, he couldn't respond to me. I'd say, okay, Dad, here's some Brahms. I'm going to play this for you. And now I'm going to move to some Mozart. Boy, did you hear me playing that for hours and hours, you know, in my bedroom and, you know, when I was younger. And now here's some Star Wars. So I was just kind of narrating through the, you know, talking to him while I was playing. But it was just a really organic experience. But then I thought to myself after that was over, I'm like, I am a musician and I am a clarinet player. And that is who I am. And that is who, I can do all kinds of other things, right? I can. But at the heart of my essence, I'm a clarinet player. That's what I want to be. And what does that look like? I'll figure it out. I don't want to be anything else.
Beautifully said.
Very sorry for your loss there, Laura.
Sorry for your loss.
Thank you. But I think being able to be there and play my clarinet, all that training, I think he waited for me. And I think he enjoyed it. And I think it gave him the courage and the peace to move on.